So we briefly talked about the ducks pattern in the last lesson. Now let's implement it in our project. So here in the source folder, I'm going to add a new folder called store. Next, we need to move all these files except index.js inside this folder. So I'm going to select all of these files, move them inside the store folder, and then pull out index.js and put it under the source folder. Let's save the changes. Okay. So here's our store folder. Now we want to create a duck. So in this app, we're going to have a domain for managing the list of bugs. So here I'm going to add a new file called bugs.js. So that's going to be a slice of our store. Now we start moving code from these separate files into this bundle. We start from action types. Let's move all this code in bugs.js. We can also add a comment on the top to separate different sections like action types. Next, we move our action creators. So before going further, let me delete this file. Next, we have actions.js. Now, with this approach, we no longer have to import all these action types and then prefix them with actions dot, because all this code is going to be in a single file. So our code is going to be simpler. So let's move all this code in bugs.js. I'm going to add a new section called action creators. And then I'm going to select actions dot, press Command and D on Mac or Control and D on Windows to enable multi-cursor editing, and then remove this prefix. So this is cleaner. Now let's get rid of actions.js. Good. Next, we move our reducer. So again, we don't have to import all these action types. So let's move the rest of the code into our new module. So we add a new section called reducer, paste all the code, and then remove all references to actions dot. Once again, we enable multi-cursor editing. There you go. So we have 3 instances, delete, good. Now there are a couple of rules you need to follow when applying the ducks pattern. The first rule is that your reducer has to be a default export in this module. The second rule is that you need to export individual action creators, which we are doing so far. And in this case, we don't need to export these constants because these are used only in this module. They're implementation detail. So other modules don't need to know about these constants. So let's simplify this code. We remove all these exports. Good. We're done with this module. Now let's remove our reducer. Next, we go to our store. We removed our reducer. So now we should import this reducer from the bugs module, okay? And because this is a default export, we don't need to wrap it in braces, okay? So our store is ready. And finally, let's go to index.js. Now, let's bring this code back in. Okay. Now, we need to import the store from the store folder, the store module. Now, this looks a bit weird, but we're going to fix that in the future. Don't worry about it for now. But what about our actions? Well, they're no longer in the actions module, so we should import them from the bugs module. Now, is it a bad practice to import all objects from this module in one go? Well, it depends. In this particular case, not really, because this is a very small module. It has very little code. If you were dealing with a large library like Lodash, importing all these objects would be a bad practice. That would cause some memory overhead. In this case, we don't have to worry about it. So let's save the changes. Our application is still working, beautiful. Now the last thing I want to fix here is this ugliness, store/store. So let's rename this file from store to configure store. Instead of exporting our store, we want to export a function for creating the store. So export default function, configure store. When we call this function, we get this store. So let's move it over here and then return it. That's better. With this, we go to our index.js. Now, let's rename this to configure store and call it over here. This returns a store object, so we store it locally in this module. So here's the ducks pattern. we have a single file that includes all of our action types, action creators, and reducer. If you don't like this pattern, you don't have to use it. Redux doesn't care. It's entirely up to you how you want to structure your files and folders. But I personally prefer this approach because whenever I want to make any changes in the bugs domain, I simply look up bugs.js and boom, here I am. In contrast, if we had multiple action or reducer files, we would have to look up actions or reducer. Then we would see a long list of files that we had to scroll through to find the right file. So every approach has its pros and cons. It's entirely up to you to decide what approach works best for your team and your project.